generally about the project and its progress. We will go into more detail over the rest of today and the next couple of days, so I won't dwell too long on the details of the project itself. However, I do think it's important that we take a short time to reflect on what has been achieved and why it matters. From the start, this has always been an EUT project. It's always been an ECT lab project. It's had participation was all the partners from the EUT as it was at that time. Casino has joined us since, so they're not here. But the central themes have been the themes of the ECT lab. The themes of aesthetics of care, of its ecological dimensions, its entanglements with technological education. These were all informed by the values and concerns of the ECT lab. And they can be summarized as being ethical, aesthetic, and epistemological. The project followed from the Aestihco project, its predecessor, which looked at the ethical aspects of technological education. And Episteme followed as a Marie Curie staff exchange with an epistemological focus. So everything we do tends to be connected. It's important to note that Aestihco and the other projects are significant drivers of what we do in the ECT lab. And they work because they offer opportunities to bring together our partners in events like this, which are high intensity encounters driven by scholarship, driven by creative practice of all types, and also this kind of social engagement that we have when we all come together. But before we move on to kind of the business of the day, I want to kind of situate the project within a context of technological change, because that's one of the drivers of this. And I think I have an illustration that's as powerful as possible when we think about the central importance of an aesthetics of care in technology and its development. So I'm going to quickly touch on the development of what's become known as generative AI. Our advanced pattern recognition, characterized by large language models, as our colleagues in computer science would be more pedantically would describe them as. And so the interesting thing about this is AI has spanned the duration of this project. So in April of 2022, OpenAI released GPT 3.5. That was the first precursor of what became known as ChatGPT, and it was the first one with this kind of interactive web interface with it. Then ChatGPT comes out in November 2022. In July of 2022, DALL-E, the first kind of really engaging image generation program, is made available. And since then, we've seen kind of nothing less than, a generational shift in IT industries, in global capital, as business and governments scramble to position themselves in what they see as the AI future. So the project has spanned kind of interesting times. So in 2022, I got an invitation to test the DALL-E beta. This was a kind of a limited private invitation that was sent out to creators to test out this new way of generating images through AI. The initial impact for me was quite profound. As an artist, it seemed to upend everything that we knew it seemed to upend everything we knew as artists, what we did, how we understood images, how we understood the dissemination and the circulation of images. And it seemed to me in a way that it was going to change the way we did art, maybe, and the way we understood the way images work in the world, and more than anything, say, than maybe the advent of internet-connected smartphones earlier on in kind of 2008 or so. So at this point, in these early encounters with generative AI, it was about creative possibilities, about new forms of co-creation and critical engagement with technology. And this had characterized so many media art forms in the past. With these new kind of engagements, and creative possibilities, presaging significant shifts in the everyday use of these technologies. For example, net art and the advent and the kind of widespread use of the internet, or perhaps location media and the kind of mainstream acceptance of the smartphone and its location awareness. But as these systems, and I'm particularly thinking about DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, the kind of the very prominent image generation ones, as they became more sophisticated and more capable, the early promise faded. As large language models are being deployed in all sectors, regardless of their utility or their appropriateness, the lack of care in their development and use has become really, really significant and prominent. On top of that, we can certainly kind of point to the ecological cost of these platforms and these tools. The rampant energy use is unraveling substantive efforts to decarbonize our homes, our economies. They're turbocharging information and harmful decision-making based on hallucination, based on biased training data. Model training is fueled by industrial-scale infringement of copyright, with creators finding large language models producing uncanny pastiches of their own work, even as corporations lobby for suspending the rules of intellectual property, with, of course, exceptions for their own intellectual property. So the resultant acceleration in surveillance capital practices has eroded privacy even further, and we're seeing a giant data grab for personal information to feed these models of AI. So against this context, this was one of many contexts that are happening at the same time, the project's understanding that new transdisciplinary approaches are needed if technological education is to meet the challenges of the 21st century seems very, very, very appropriate indeed. As we've found, developing this idea of an aesthetics of care in relation to technology becomes this core underpinning of the project. It was built on this very early sense that we had that concrete ways of caring for each other, for human societies and for the environment, needed to be encoded into how we design, build, interact with, employ or aestheticize technology. So the future technologists will have these concrete ethical frameworks to work with. Aesthetics of care in this context is understood as a form of praxis, an individual practice that had collective implications. It permeated all social, economic, and technical relationships in this era that we're living in, which is the Anthropocene. And of course, when we started, this seemed all quite abstract to some people. And I think over the duration of the 3 years, it has become increasingly concrete. We're able to point to clear and important developments in technology that could have been made so much better if there had been more care incorporated into how these were developed, how they were rolled out, and how they were used. So in that respect, I think we have been prescient. Have we changed anything? Perhaps, perhaps not. We don't know. But I think we are certainly fighting the good fight. We are in the place where we need to be, and I think this is kind of a sign that that the work of this project has been important. It's needed now, perhaps more than ever. Okay, so in terms of the project itself, we know that we've had, in terms of concrete outputs, we've had 4 project results. The first one is mapping aesthetics and technological education. The second, circular economies of design. The third, the teacher training module. And the fourth, the student module. We had 2 teaching and learning training events. They were the intensive study programs. They were the first one in teacher training program Cartagena in May 23, the student program in Limassol in April 24. This is the second of our 2 multiplier events. The first one was the exhibition in Limassol last November. We've had 7 TPM meetings, transnational project meetings, 1 more to go. We're almost there. And we've delivered almost all our deliverables. So I just want to thank everyone who's put so much time into this project. Collectively, we've put in almost over 1,100 billable hours for the Commission, which is quite a substantial achievement. But beyond these time commitments, there's been so much creativity, I think intellectual rigor, dedication, quite a few robust exchanges, and so much collegiality. And I think this has made this project something really, really special. I want to thank a few people. I'm not going to be able to thank everyone because we will literally be here for the next few days. But I do want to thank Joanna, Sylvan, and Joanna and everyone here in Cluj for putting this together. The hospitality has been fantastic, the organization, and we're really looking forward to a couple of days of really stimulating experience. I want to thank all the leads for the project results who have been really keeping the show on the road, and that's Connell and Mick for PR1 in TU Dublin, Marianos and Teresa in Cyprus, Joanna for PR3, and then Joanna again for PR4. And I particularly want to thank to all our hosts who have hosted events over the 3 years. Thank you for all your hospitality and the organisation, all the work that goes into this. And I want to thank especially to all the people who can't be here today, people who have worked on the project over the time and maybe moved to different jobs, moved to different areas, but their kind of input hasn't been forgotten. And I know that I should thank so many more people, but as I said, we will be here all morning. So consider yourself thanked, and I think this has been a really kind of important project, a significant project. It doesn't always seem so. Sometimes when you're working through, it seems like another job on top of all the other jobs that we have. But I do feel that this project will have significant outputs and that we will see our modules being employed in different contexts across the network and hopefully beyond the network, and that it will have this legacy that goes beyond the life of the project. So thank you so much.
Through this project for so many years. Next on our schedule is a keynote lecture from our dear colleague from Germany, Stanford University. Her name is, I'll try to pronounce it. I've practiced. Sabine Weizsamer. Sorry. So Sabine is the director of the master's program in International Media Cultural Work, and she's an awarded winning producer, curator, and festival director with almost 3 decades of practical experience in the media industry. She has been the jury of many important media art prizes, and her work focuses on media art, listening culture, and cultures of perception, experimental audio media, media history, media ecology, trans and interculturality. She teaches and researches as a professor for sound and media culture at the Darmstadt University of Applied Sciences, as I already said, and she has been the director of Soundscape and Environmental Media Lab and 3D Audio Lab. Would you please honor us with your keynote presentation for today's session? Thank you so much.
Where do I have to push the button? The arrows. Okay, good. Okay, good. Thank you so much. Yeah, good morning, and thank you very much for attending. And thanks for giving me the occasion. I hope the mic is okay like that. Thanks for giving me the occasion to hopefully contribute to clarify a important term we had been dealing with here in this project. It's the term of, the aesthetic, or aesthetics, as it's said. And it's a crucial term in our project, but I think it needs still some discussion. I think there's a never-ending discussion, of course, about this term. And the only thing I want to say before I start is I'm dealing today with philosophers who mainly wrote in Latin and in German. And the biggest challenge for me today is, besides that I haven't slept very long because my plane arrived very late, but the biggest challenge for me today is to translate the relevant terms into English. And as you know, English is not my first language, so if you see any inconsistencies, please let me know. And anyways, let's just try and start. So, the arrows. Yeah, here we go. So, central question, what's the aesthetic? And as you all know, it's an ancient Greek term, aesthesis, which is sensory perception, sensation, and also, of course, cognition. This is the term's root. And in my work with students, but also in my previous life, working as an artistic director, as a curator and an artist, I heard a lot of misunderstandings, prejudices, opinions concerning the aesthetic that only grasp the concept on the surface. So this is my motivation now to talk about it. What you hear sometimes is aesthetics is about positive emotions, it's about hygiene, because the appalling is the unaesthetic. At least this is how we use the term in German. It's not aesthetic, means it's a little bit dirty. Aesthetic is also about fashion and chicness, some people say. So it looks aesthetic, so it's chic, it's fashionable, and so on. It's about good taste, some people think, and what people should like. Yeah, and it's about rules for the arts. This is also a very common misunderstanding I'm hearing when I like to talk about aesthetic. And indeed, it's a term which is used in a multitude of ways, but again, as I said, it's usually not so deeply understood. Well, it's equated often with the pleasant and related to the beautiful, usually visually related. It's a judgment of preferences and taste. This is one of the ways it's used. It is understood as sensory experience, often thought of devoid of content and meaning, as opposed to the reason-based or intellectual experience. It's an understanding of art and creation of art. So we are talking about specific artists, aesthetics, we used to say. It's thought of as a sensory cognitive faculty. It's thought of study of the senses. And in this respect, it's a philosophical discipline, and this is what I want to talk about. The arrows. Yeah. So myself coming from the field of sound studies and soundscape studies, for me there is another interesting aspect to this term, what is the aesthetic, or for this idea, what is the aesthetic? Why, for example, has the topic of sound as Geräusch, as we say, the sound of the everyday as opposed to the musical sound, been considered as something random, like noise, not aesthetically meaningful and therefore inferior, although quite a number of composers work with it? There's another question related to that. Why are noises, Geräusche, everyday sounds, still considered by many people, even educated ones, not worth to be considered as aesthetically valid materials for composition? Or generally asked, why is it so that everyday phenomena are placed at the bottom of the aesthetic value hierarchy? I learned the philosophical basis of exploring the aesthetic comprehensively is, compared to the many philosophical efforts of identifying reason and intellect, quite shaky, and we can say that throughout the century. The aesthetic has been considered merely as an accessory, as something nice to have, but not really necessary, an expression of affluence and luxury. It has been considered as something unreasonable, irrational, and useless. Students often ask me, what do I gain from it? Can I buy something with it? Of course not. It has been considered of being incapable of cognition, relating to questions like, what is the artist trying to tell us? What is the message? Failing to recognize that it is not the what, but the how that is crucial to access art's cognitive potential. And it is considered insignificant, as the significance of aesthetics in a society has been disputed, we could even say denied, for centuries due to utilitarianism. So it's a quite of a shaky ground when we want to talk about the aesthetics. And I wanted to dig deeper into it, and of course, when you want to know more about the aesthetic or the aesthetics of especially everyday life phenomena, this led me to the philosopher Baumgarten, and we had been also talking about him a number of times, and I think he is very interesting. Baumgarten founded aesthetics as a philosophical discipline by writing his Aestihca in 1750, and it's a very, very 2-volume thick book. Is really very, very huge, very big, a lot of things to read. This was courageous at that time for somebody who wanted to be considered a serious person, a serious academic person, as sensuality and aesthetics in Prussia were dominated by Protestantism, and it was not so much talking about senses, about aesthetics, was not acceptable as a serious academic object at that time. One of his former students, who became a professor himself, Georg Friedrich Meyer, was a defender of Baumgarten, and he mentioned that pointing to the senses in the Prussia of this time is synonymous for the original sin, and that what language refers to as flesh. So the flesh is sin, and therefore the flesh needs to be crucified. That was the thinking of that time. Baumgarten's challenge as a philosopher and an academician was to establish his aesthetics academically and survive all the disputes of morality related to that. Could I have a glass of water, please? Thank you. Aestihca was written in Latin, and no full and systematic translation into German was there until 2005. 1807. Latin was the scientific and scholarly language of this time, and it was only by Immanuel Kant that German became an equally valid scholarly language. So that was one of the good things Kant did, but at that time Aesthetica was in Latin. And I can also say, thank you very, very much, that Aesthetica was what I would say an admirable misfire, and I will elaborate on that a little bit later. So what are Aesthetica's Baumgarten's central ideas? Baumgarten's central motivation was to question reason's demand for universality. Remember, 1750 was the high time of the Enlightenment era. He assigned art an analogon rationis, a similarity with reason, and that was very, very provoking at that time. He was convinced that the dominance of natural sciences and their logic reduce the opportunities of cognition, and opportunity of cognition he sees in perception and the aesthetic. That was something which nobody dared say at that time. He stated that the lower realm, as it was called, the senses were considered the lower realm, is capable of a kind of cognitive. He was not concerned primarily with a theory about art, but with perception in general, and that was something also very interesting. He was saying that everyday perceptions are ideas capable of being Repräsentationes, which we would say in German geistfähiges Material, and this is very difficult to translate. Materials to be used for artistic creation, so spirited through with a kind of artistic inspiration or an artistic idea. Everyday life perceptions he considered to be like that. That was a very, very strong provocation. And Baumgarten speaks clearly about sensory cognition, which is not to be superimposed by intellectual comprehension. So he was very clear that there is sensory cognition, and he speaks also, I think this is very interesting, of the beauty of cognition as a result of beautiful thinking. And beautiful thinking, he thought, is an animated, inspired thinking deeply in touch with the sensory. So this is to be found, a kind of beautiful thinking which shows the beauty of cognition. He relativizes the beautiful to a concept as opposed to a norm. Important, there is not the predefined beauty to which all have to agree. So he did not have a normative understanding of that. And he identifies a specific aesthetic mentality in an individual which is based on imagination and a pronounced sense of feeling, which needs to interact with a graceful mind, as he said, in such a way that feelings do not suppress different types of thoughts. So he said emotions, feelings, senses do have to interact with the mind, with the intellect in a graceful way, in the way how he understood the beautiful thinking. So this is a kind of character image he is drawing. A mental disposition is therefore necessary, which needs to be developed and educated. As I said in the beginning, Baumgarten's Aesthetica, I consider it as an admirable misfire, because his ideas were overrun by Immanuel Kant's dominating philosophy. And Kant was an Enlightenment philosopher, but at the same time he was also critical of the Enlightenment, and that made his strengths. I will talk about Kant in 2 minutes or so, or 10 minutes, I don't know. And Baumgarten's Aesthetica remained still a child of rationalism, operating with its terms and formulations, not finding a different language towards the whole realm of aesthetics. Maybe that was his weakness. Kant can defy Baumgarten's opening towards the senses by insisting that the cognitive process driven by the sensitive can only become intelligible by reason. Therefore, everything, according to Kant, merges in reason or must merge in reason. That is Kant. That's the dominating way of thinking of that time. So Baumgarten, as I said, was much ahead of his time. So why was it so that Baumgarten's aesthetics was such a challenge for his contemporaries? We have to go back in history to Plato and his cave allegory. I think you all are familiar with it. The cave allegory exemplifies the process of inhabitants of a cave which are prisoners, misled by their perceptions, the latter being mere projections of which the cave people are not aware. Even in case the cave inhabitants would be able to turn around their head, get out of the caves, go into the sunlight and towards what Plato considered the truth, they would go through a painful and doubtful process, Plato expressed, which would confuse them as the sun would blind them so much in the beginning when they came out of the cave that they would not be able to perceive anything. So their perception would lead them to the assumption that it is not worthwhile to leave the cave and get a grasp of their environment and the truth. According to Plato, it is necessary to liberate oneself from the world of the transient senses to reach the purely intellectual world of unchanging idea. Plato also assumes sensually perceptible phenomena are only imperfect, illusionary, and therefore questionable images of a very limited truth value from which humans have to free themselves and others. They have to help others in order to free themselves from these illusions and these imperfections of the senses. The senses are deceptive and they do not lead to the truth. This principle permeated Christianity and its related philosophy, and determined, therefore, its relationship to the senses right until up to the modern era. And neither Baumgarten nor Kant nor Hegel could escape that. I want to talk about Immanuel Kant's relation to the aesthetic. He wrote a very important book, The Critique of Aesthetic Judgment. The judgment by the senses, he said there, is not a cognitive judgment, therefore not logical, but aesthetic, by which it can only be subjective. So he was very clear in having the intellectual realm or the realm of reason and the realm of the senses. Kant says sensuality is bound to the immediacy of perception. It is strictly separated from the concept bound to reason as an intellectual concept. He thus establishes a fundamental duality between perception and concept. This duality does not allow the senses to claim knowledge and cognition. Another important thought of Kant, the pleasure that characterizes the aesthetic judgment is devoid of all interest, and I think this is a very important statement he gave. And Kant went into a lot of details in order to clarify that. He wrote pages and pages about that to exemplify that. Taking delight in the pleasurable, in the good, is connected with interest, he explains, so it's not really fit for aesthetic judgment. Taking delight in the beauty as such, however, is solely an uninterested and free pleasure, so this is fit for aesthetic judgment. So he's explaining that. And devoid of all interest, is the aesthetic judgment is. His statement is, here's another statement, all interest presupposes a need or produces one, and as the determinant of applause, it no longer leaves the judgment of the object free. And this is, I think, also illuminating his way, how he understands that, devoid of all interest. The interest he means is, of course, not the interest we talk about in nowadays language, but he means by the interest the utilitarian. Kant says, for art is a daughter of freedom, and from the necessity of the spirits, not from the necessity of matter, it wants to receive its order. So the aesthetic judgment is not an objective and a cognitive judgment. That's Kant's statement. He contradicts Baumgarten, who gives an importance to the aesthetic as a realm in itself. And he seems to weaken the idea of the aesthetic, but in fact, Kant lays the ground that the idea of the aesthetic can get rooted in the philosophy. And we owe him that the idea of the aesthetic gained importance and continues to exist, although he is contradicting Baumgarten very, very much. Let's go to Hegel. Hegel was much more rigid, much more narrowing down the realm of the aesthetic, even not tolerating it to be a realm in its own right. He was very clear about that. And aesthetic contemplation as such, so the perception, the sensual, has no meaning to Hegel. The aesthetic has no value in itself. That was his position. According to Hegel, it must be philosophically interpretable, morally loaded or morally charged. According to Hegel, philosophy transports art to a higher level. According to Hegel, aesthetic phenomena require a substantial content, which in that it also presents itself in the form and shape of the external, becomes a particularity in such a way that everything merely external about it is eradicated and destroyed. So the content, the inner essence, is supposed to be overcome by the appearance, by the external. Yeah? So the appearance as such does not play a big role for Hegel. This attitude is applied by Hegel to everything that exists, not only to art or not only to the sensual. If the existing is not filled with content from which cognition, and only from which cognition can arise, then it is meaningless. Quote Hegel, pure being is pure voidness. So the sensual, the aesthetic is for Hegel like a vessel that is empty, and it needs to be filled with content, with knowledge, with cognition. Only then it is worth that the aesthetic is an object of reflection. Schelling, the next philosopher I'm addressing, is Hegel's antagonist. He opens up a specific realm for the aesthetic, as we will see. Schelling draws on Kant, but tries to reverse the direction of thought in philosophy also with regard to aesthetics. Kant says philosophy can only be concerned with what is intellectually accessible. Schelling says the real subject of philosophy is that which is not accessible through reason. Reason is only the surface. Schelling postulates a so-called dark thinking, which reflects the inaccessible. And it refers to all areas that are inaccessible to intellect and reason. So dark thinking is not reflecting in clarifying terms. Dark thinking is not something sinister, I have to say here. So it's not reflecting in clarifying terms in the language of the Enlightenment, but stands for thinking beyond language-based terms and beyond a language of reason and intellect. It's based on a thinking outside language, and this is, of course, as we can understand, strongly related to art. As in art, something takes shape outside of language, so it can be a truth in its own right beyond language. So the dark thinking he refers to is the religion, which mysticism especially, art and perception, where we talk about what we talk about, the aesthetic, the exploration of myth, which is important to Schelling, and very interesting, the future, because this is an area Schelling says we cannot enter. So this also requires what Schelling says, the so-called dark thinking. Schelling decidedly poses the question of the nothing, and he thus legitimizes the aesthetic as something that does not have to serve as a vehicle for content and morality, but stands as a phenomenon in its own right, able to express something specific that cannot be expressed in any other way, and thus is capable of truth. This was only possible after Hegel. Schelling was having the chair of Hegel. When Hegel had been leaving Berlin because he was retiring, Schelling came, and Schelling was a very, very important event on that chair of philosophy at the Berlin University. People from all over the world came to listen to him, and even people from, everyday life, generals from the military, a lot of people from politics came just to listen to Schelling. So he was a real star, a philosophical star, because he was after Kant, and people were hoping that after Hegel, and people were hoping that a post-Hegelian thought would now really come out of it. He was also the philosopher of Romanticism, as you might easily have guessed from what I have said. So this was only possible after Hegel, and so it became Schelling's role, as he was Hegel's successor, that attempts were made to emancipate the aesthetic from art in order to legitimize the aesthetic as an object of philosophical reflection. A high realm such as art was required. The aesthetic as sensual perception was considered low, so the aesthetic had to be represented in something high. And Schelling was saying, well, this is no longer necessary, that we have to make a distinction between a higher realm and a lower realm, and we have to use art in order to upvalue the senses. He said that's no longer necessary. And just a little side thought, Schelling was a founder of existential philosophy, by the way. I want last to focus on Friedrich Schiller, because he had been writing a very important book, and he also was very much influenced, and in these debates and discussions about the relationship between reason, intellect versus the aesthetic. The text I'm referring to on the aesthetic education of man reflects Schiller's disappointment with the course of the French Revolution and its outcome. He saw this development as a result of the dictates of enlightenment and reason, and as a result of the arbitrariness of the senses and nature, of instinct-drivenness, egoisms, greed, striving for superiority, etc. Schiller's idea, in order to change society, one has to start educating the individual in order to establish a state of freedom, a community of freedom, which does not need to act repressively and who is inventive and free in thought. An important quote here is, beneath the physical and the moral characteristic of the human, there needs to be a third characteristic established, which can relate the reign of the forces and the reign of the law without hindering the development of humans' moral character. Rather, it should serve as a moral pledge of the invisible morality. This third characteristic Schiller is referring to, he sees in the aesthetic. Aesthetic education is, for Schiller, a prerequisite to make the sensual human reasonable, as he assumes. This will help the humans to overcome their animal condition, as he says, and not to be so easily deceived by the sensual, which knows no other motivation for action than their own advantage. This aesthetic education is about ennobling the human character, according to Schiller. I think I should refer also to two different types of beauty Schiller was pointing to. He talks about the melting beauty versus the energetic beauty. The melting beauty is related to devotion and to just receive that and be awestruck. And the energetic beauty is this beauty related to the will to create and form. And both, he says, have to be balanced. And in order to be balanced, this needs to have aesthetic education by making people familiar with the refined use of the senses and through making them familiar with the arts, both receptively and creatively. Schiller sees this education as ennobling of a character so that the human is prepared to act morally and does not act as, he says, a barbarian whose principles destroy his sensibilities, or like a savage whose sensibilities dominate his principles. For Schiller, moral is not a category in its own right, but something which is coined by reason and sensibility, so last but not least is guided by the appreciation of the aesthetic as a form of intense attention, devotion, and care. Still, he cannot free the aesthetic from subordinating itself to ethics and moral. But I think what we heard about Schiller sounds a little bit familiar in relation to our project. There were thinkers and artist-thinkers who detached themselves from ethics and moral. That would be another lecture. Just to mention Baudelaire or Richard Wagner. They go for the sensual intensity, for the immersion, and for the recipient being immersed in the sensual, where reason gets suspended. So what could be the consequences for our project, for Aestihco? I think a lot can be discussed here. The aesthetic as a special, vulnerable realm, I think, became quite clear, which needs to be identified and fostered. If we identify it, we know that it is existing. But if we deny it and say, well, that's not so important, or maybe that's just something made up in the minds, then of course it does not exist, and then it cannot be effective, it cannot take effect. So another point is educating humans towards this realm, to step into this realm where they can find a space where they neither get trapped in the utilitarian and the purely reasonable, nor in the mere instinct and randomness. I think this is a very important thing, that we open up this kind of space and that we are able to guide people into it so that they can really balance instinct, randomness versus the reasonable, and helping to find a realm where both are suspended, as I said, the instinct and the utilitarian, the reasonable versus the instinct, and you can find a place of being. I think that's important. We're talking about a place of being instead of a collection of things, and I think that makes a big difference if we don't talk only about things, which, for example, the Enlightenment did all the time. They were just talking about things and how they can be perceived and whether they are true or not. No, we're now talking about being, and I think that makes a difference. That makes also a difference in the consciousness of people we want to guide into that field of the aesthetic. Thank you very much.
Journey through aesthetics. cost of doing coffee. Santiago has an opinion.
An opinion, coffee.
Is regarding this last slide, which I think is very important, these specific events, which define the event project. And I think on something that we're learning on process, and I want to know your input on this, is the importance of this essential kind of experience that we have as humans have very important consequences in the economy, in the way that we produce objects and services, we relate to the environment. And it's those experiences that we realize that we've done things wrong. So through the let's put it this way, essential and emotional experience of climate change that we get to understand that our economy should change in a particular way. What is your, and I'm thinking about you students, they're learning, kind of, we're doing these for teaching people how to kind of cross my thought in a way. What is your opinion on that?
Opinion, big opinion. Yes, I think there is a number of aspects to that. First of all, I think that we have landed at this situation which you described, is that there were too many utilitarian ways of, directing our efforts, in utilitarian ways only. That's, of course, one thing. So the reason has come to a kind of the end, or the reason did not prove to be something, very, very productive at this point. Yeah, and to live in a world where it's worth living is also a kind of a sensual experience, of course. Yeah, if the air smells bad, that's a sensual experience. If the water tastes bad, it's a sensual experience. If there is noise all over, this is sensual experience, and so on. So we haven't really taken care of these sensual experiences. We have denied them, and our societies also said this is not so important. It's not so important if you cannot sleep at night because it's noisy in the streets. Yeah, we have a higher aim, because with a higher aim, that is that we have people who are working, people who can make a living, a society which can produce something, and so on and so on. So we had a hierarchy of values which was leading us to this point, and this is why I wanted to get back to these thinkers, because they suggest different hierarchies of values, and they also talk about the tangents of these values. And this, I think, is for me at least, it's a very
beauty or energetic beauty. And I think for students, technological students, engineering, maybe science students would be good. So please share it. And also, I mean, some of the thinking, I don't know if you can go back to remember, because I got the dark thinking.
Yes.
First, some talk about the beautiful thinking, something like that was it.
Yes, the beautiful thinking, yes, of Baumgarten, yeah.
That was opposite or was related to the other?
It's related to the other, right? It's related, yeah. The dark thinking is not a sinister thinking, as I said, but it's trying to think or to understand the inaccessibilities of our existence, yeah. And art is one of them, or the senses, yeah.
So it's nothing to reduce into the very simple language, which is not always easy, as you said at the beginning, because it's not English or another language. I think it's sort of short terms that could be identified. More deeper thoughts are really useful too. Thank you again. Please share the presentation.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much. sociologist and an architect walking into a bar,
What's happening?
into a conference room and presenting the different sections of the project. So just to give you a broader look of what happened in the past 3 years, every coordinator for each project result will present the initial thoughts that we had 4 years ago when we wrote the project, the tasks that we had to complete, the deliverables, the events, and so on. This will be more of a presentation than a discussion, because in the afternoon, after the exhibition, which is in that room, we'll talk about it after lunch. And after that exhibition, also we will have a roundtable with discussions about the actual outcomes of this project. So I'm going to ask our first coordinator from TUW, Colin Vaughn, Nick, all right, he didn't tell me. So I have to switch now. The joke is one philosopher, two artists, one sociologist, and one architect walking into a conference room in Transylvania. So we are one.
Hello everyone. So my name is Colin Bonham, and this is my colleague, Nico Harrow. We're based in TU Dublin, and we led PR1, so it's the first kind of project and work package in, well, that's not the right term, in Aestihco. And so what we're going to do is talk about what we did in that package, and yeah. So we had some tasks ordered in this way that we were focusing on, and as you can see, what they are here was to kind of come up with a definition around what we meant by aesthetics of care, and to really think of that through the different disciplines that we were coming from. And so that was kind of the first thing that we worked on. We then looked at trying to develop a repository of all of the different kind of approaches, and to explain our definition and to expand it in that way. So there's some other tasks that I'll talk about, the midpoint seminar, and okay, yeah. What's happening there? It's coming up on the screen, is it? Okay. So the first thing that we did really in the project was this, and this was our trip to Darmstadt in November 2022, and this is really where the project kind of began to come alive for us, is where we tried to define as best we could what we meant by aesthetics of care in this context of ecology and technological education. And so this was the definition then that we were able to deliver for the other work in the project. So you can see here is that we describe what we mean by aesthetics of care as a process which has a particular aim, which is obviously then building on the work that was done in other projects like Aestihco, and informed by both the history and practices of aesthetics. So Sabine talked earlier on about one area of the history of the term aesthetics, and so that was one of the things that informed this. And so we came up with this final line as well, that an aesthetics of care is something that entails a caring for the self, for others, and for the planet. So, let's say, armed with that definition, then PR1 would meet online pretty frequently, every 2 or 3 weeks. Just 27 meetings in total, I counted them. And one of the tasks then that we developed was a template for how to review texts in terms of the concerns and considerations of what an aesthetics of care entails. And this is the kind of review template that we developed in terms of assessing, journal articles and books and so on, in terms of how useful it would be for an aesthetics of care in the context of a technological education. At this stage we have 51 reviews completed. There's a folder on the wall, which is the kind of repository that we use, and they're all there available, so it's kind of amongst all the members of the group to be able to access these. And then this then became the basis for a more extended understanding of what we mean by aesthetics of care. And these reviews were completed by the different partners and the different people working on PR1. But what that did was informed our next kind of stage, which was a presentation of a summary of this, and working on a summary of this for the next kind of in-person meeting, which was the in Cartagena about a year and a half ago. Okay, and so you can see on the top there we're kind of ticking off the certain tasks mentioned at the start. And the idea is that these reviews would inform both the teacher training and the student training aspects of the project. And so in this context and at this time period, what we were working on was this, which is that kind of longer form, like longer than that 50-word definition that we had at the start. And this longer form combined with kind of summary. So we then co-wrote, informed by our reviews, a summary of what we mean by an aesthetics of care in this context and ecology. So that's a 13-page document that we have. And so there was one other kind of, would we say, named task from the beginning, which was the midpoint seminar. And so February last year is when this took place, and you can see the schedule for it there on the right hand side. And so it's like a 2.5 hour online seminar that we coordinated, where lots of different people across the whole project came and presented their work online. Because we were at such a kind of early stage or whatever, we recorded this, and we were instrumental in creating a YouTube profile for the ECT lab. So it's there, it's still the first video. Well, it's the first video. There's been a few more added on the ECT lab, so you can go and watch that whenever you have the time. And yeah, so that's where the midpoint seminar was developed, alongside lots of the other kind of, we might say, related and kind of points, or some related points to the kind of very formal tasks. There was other projects that PR1 were involved with. One of these was the second conference of the ECT lab. And so this was building on the first conference, which was, of course, Technologos and the Anthropocene. And so we inserted that word care and kind of a consideration of aesthetics. So the second conference added that word care. And this was held in Dublin in January 2023. And the proceedings were subsequently published and are available online, open access. So there's a lot of kind of the thinking of what was developed in PR1 informs that text as well. Then also in that context, coming out of the midpoint seminar, there was a related presentation at a conference in Genoa in September last year. But I'm not going to talk too much about that. So just to say that there was other kind of places that the work from PR1 was developed. And one of the things that how PR1 connected to one of the ways that PR1 connected to the other PRs was through the development of the module descriptor. And so this was a document that then we took a draft of and developed a final version for PR4, and so that document is one that we worked a lot on, which was to really see how that literature review would inform the module descriptor. So that document as well was developed. And the final task, I know that Conor mentioned that like we're pretty much done, but the kind of one major, I would say, outstanding thing is the online knowledge base. And so all of the information has been collected in Waller, but that is of course only kind of like semi-public. You need kind of access to that, and so there's scope for a more public-facing presentation of the research. And you can see what we have so far is we have the bibliography along with the reviews, the definition, the syllabus, the combined summary, and some of the other related outputs are some publications that came from PR1 as well. And so there's there's a book review that was published recently and a journal article that's forthcoming as well. I'm conscious that I've just after racing through all the slides. I don't know if Mick has anything you'd like to add that I've probably skipped.
No, I suppose maybe the kind of crucial piece was the development of the definition, and I suppose looking at this term aesthetics and taking the two other terms of care and ecology and treating them, I suppose, as kind of framing mechanisms about reconsidering this notion of aesthetics, and that in a sense the lit review was a task that was set to reflect that, to reflect the ambition of thinking aesthetics beyond perhaps that particular understanding of the term, and see how it could be built into the subsequent modules that be produced from it. So I mean that was the really productive part about it, was the participation, obviously from people from different disciplines feeding in from their own specialities into how aesthetics is understood, but also how, say, concerns around ecology and care themselves were kind of implicated in the kind of scoping document as well. So the scoping document was a really fundamental piece of work that was done, I suppose, because it gave a kind of a scaffold to both, say, the module descriptor that Colin described, but also led to, say, I suppose, individual responses of taking the document and, say, producing other journal articles and outputs from that. So I suppose the document and the reviews, there's a cohesion around how the scoping document reflects, I suppose, the literature reviews that that took place in the project itself. So yeah, and it, of course, a provisional document too in that regard. So yeah, I don't really have anything else. Really. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank to all of you for the great job we did and the great fun we had. I summarize what the tasks are and what the outcomes of this task actually we succeed to do. The first task was to develop a series of seminars on the circular economy, and we did two, one in Sofia and one in Cartagena. You can see some pictures of these seminars. The first seminar was conducted in Cartagena, and Jose is the main person responsible for this. The second one was in Sofia on the 15th of March 2023, and as an outcome we have leaflets which actually summarize the presentation which were presented during these seminars. So everything is available in Waller, so anyone is free to see it. The second task was to analyze the role of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the Circular Economy Plan. And we did an analysis based on this template we created to find the connection between the Sustainable Development Goals, circular economy, and aesthetic of care. Then we have this template for all 17 goals. Then the third task was to design a repair hackathon, thanks to Marinos and the team from Cyprus. We did that, and you can see some of the pictures from the great time we actually had in Cartagena. We conducted the hackathon in Cartagena, but thanks to Marinos and Jose and everyone else. Sorry. And finally, it's actually output from the whole PR2. We created a handbook. It's uploaded in Word. Every one of you is very welcome to review it and make some suggestions that we can use to improve our handbook. And some additional activities we did in Technical University of Sofia. We created exhibition called Men in the Measure of All Things, and there is a video which is you can reach it then in YouTube. Then the second, many engineers, and then the third one is a conference which was held in Sofia.
By the way, my name means crippled Michael, in case you are wondering. And yeah, it's not particularly impressive. Silvio, there should be a...
Is there?
Yes, brilliant. Okay, some of these images you've probably seen in the other. Might have done something. Okay, there should be an option here to have it loop. Anyone knows how it's... Where is it?
On top? On top?
Yes. Okay, so it just has to make them ready so as to go on and implement what has been unveiled in working group 4, which is all about training students. And this makes perfect sense because first you need to have teachers that are trained properly so that they can later on transfer this kind of certain approach towards technological education to students. And what we've been struggling from since then is a master's or an undergraduate project or something else. It is a master's or an undergraduate project or something else. And we've been thinking of a few various ways of doing so. This is a more practical-oriented endeavor. So we're not that much focusing on, reading and doing literature review and such, but most in how to actually practice a few things. One significant point of overlapping over here is the repair hackathon. that we did as part of working group 2, working package 2, that nevertheless played an important role in informing the practices that we tried out in working in WP3, working package 3. So the repairathon is all about implementing and building upon practices of circular economy, recycling, reusing, and so on. In a nutshell, we did a few different versions of this, some with more success than others. And of course, it relates a lot with work I'm doing myself in how to have groups of students and generally a group of people working together with their hands. That's the main thing, you know, how to build things directly engaging with materials of all sorts. And in a few different contexts, the idea is that we ask people to bring stuff, materials that they would otherwise throw away. Okay, be them for things that they found in the recycling unit in their area or that they have around in their house and so on. And then see how we can repurpose them, how we can do something more, something other, how we can somehow breathe new life into them. And I think this is a very important tool in having students and trainers as well experience with their own flesh what aesthetics of care and aesthetics in technological education is all about. It's about demonstrating some actual care for materials that we would otherwise throw away, for techniques and technologies that might be obsolete, you know, or are already obsolete and so on. And of course, this is something that's more often than not involves getting more knowledge and more experience and more skill in things that, you know, within our current economical system might appear as useless. Okay. So for instance, I've done, you will see maybe some photographs of this. I've also done some own experiments with analog photographic materials and techniques, so how to build upon this in a fashion that kind of exploits technologies that are getting lost. But still, I think that there is a lot in there because there is a substantial body of stuff, of matter, expired films, expired papers, things that are still exist, you know, that we don't want to throw away. Okay, and this is also a way to kind of introduce all these important themes, firstly to the trainers, and through the trainers to the students. Okay, so how we deal with affairs of recycling, how we deal with affairs of economy, circular economy, and so on. So that's one of the main pillars and the main areas of research that has concerned working group 3 and as a bridge with working group 2. The other one, which has been by far the most substantial and the most in terms of time and person hours and, you know, investment we've done there, concerns the use of games. So we have developed gradually through experiments a game-based strategy using role-playing games, boards of cards, and so on, as a tool to train people. So essentially, we've tried out 4 different games, some with more success than others. The Atlas of Weak Signals, which we've borrowed from the work that they've done in a makerspace in Barcelona, and that we have adapted. The In the Loop game, help me here, Santiago, who has been it's Jose, yeah, sorry, Jose, help me out. It has been developed by Cartagena, right, in another project. So they immediately get physically involved, which is important because we know from educational and learning sciences that actually having students creating an embodied environment for the students is very important and paramount in terms of helping them kind of digest the knowledge and the training process and the educational process. So immediately have them engaged physically, working with their hands, doing around, socializing, talking with one another. And suddenly you have, certain keywords that are super important for our projects, and they emerge, and then you have people talking about it, speculative about possible solutions. And essentially, this is what Aestihco is all about. This is what we want to do. We don't want to offer some concrete solution on a particular problem, because, as we grow on and as culture proceeds, there will be new problems. And, what we actually strive for is to initiate a culture within technological education that sees technologies as part of a broader cultural reality and not as something isolated. We want the new generation of technologies to be aware of the problems that relate with culture, with politics, with environmental crisis, with ecology, with economical systems, with everything that happens in our world, in the world that we share together. And this is why we also talk extensively, again overlapping with other working packages, about the four ecologies, which is like the ecology of the self, the ecology of one another. Here I would add the ecology of the more than human other, which also is important in this working group, but generally, I guess, in my opinion at least, to these affairs. I'm talking about a democracy not just of people, but also of technologies and objects. And then, of course, the entire world. And we want to arrive at a kind of technological framework that demonstrates completely care about in all these four different circles. And care here is not something abstract. It relates a lot with thinking practically and theoretically about all these things. How to use other materials, how not to produce garbages, how to deal with societal issues and so on. And also through individual practices. So if you're a chemist, how do you deal with this? The fact, for instance, that in your own laboratory you produce a lot of waste. What do you do with this? If you are working with electronics, how can you repurpose technological stuff that might be obsolete and it's still it used to be super fancy and high-tech a few years ago, but now it's already considered old. So how do you deal with this? You just throw it away, just to give a few examples. So the main pillar of work we've done in this working group has been about developing these games and practicing them and testing them in practice, so that we gather important insight on how they work in real-life settings. And I think we've done a perfect work in this respect. We also have a few applications about to happen. And in this respect, I think that this is probably our main contribution to Aestihco project, this game-based methodology. And then there is also the third and final aspect, is a more art-oriented element in working group 3, which is about essentially introducing methodologies that comes from creative art and to some certain extent from architecture as well, because we've had some more students from here that worked a lot in there. So how we can borrow methodologies and to some certain extent also aspirations from these disciplines and bring them within the framework of what I call the Aestihco subject matter: aesthetics of care, affairs of ecology, environmental concern, and so on. So in this sense, we have also developed some artistic work. You've already seen some of this in the images that they scroll, but we've done lots of things. Just to give an example, you probably see some slides here. Dimitri is doing this live performance that is all about getting and seeing the world from the point of view of the wave. Okay, so he essentially uses certain hydrophone microphones and waters and works in real time with certain sounds, so as to raise concerns about the pollution in the oceans and so on. So that's actually an example of how we can borrow methodologies and practices from the creative arts and bring them within an Aestihco framework. I've done myself some work in this direction. The most involved and probably most important example, I'll show you a small video online, and this I guess will conclude also my presentation. I do have 3 minutes, right? I'm not over. Yes, great. So again, within this context of Aestihco research and how to bring all this stuff in the classroom. And I guess this is the point where working package 3 kind of overlaps with the next one, the working package 4. So essentially, we've practiced some of the board games that we have developed. We brought them in the classroom, but more than this, also inspired by work of mine in other projects, but also with the repairathons and the reuse hackathons that we've done, I came up with these projects, Machines of Sync and Resonance. And this I have implemented in the classroom in the course of a year, so in 2 semesters. So I had a total, I think, of 3 different classes of undergraduate students working in this project. The broader context is that these classes are all about media art, so how essentially work with electronics and a little bit of basic programming, Arduinos and things like that, so as to create works of art. So I came up with this project that it's, okay, I'll show you the video. I think it explains it better.
I don't know if it has sound.
It doesn't matter that much. I think it doesn't work at all, sure.
No, the sound doesn't work.
Doesn't matter, okay. I'll talk on top of that.
In the afternoon.
No, I'll talk on top of this, it doesn't really matter. I just want you to see the images. And there is some subtitles. So in a nutshell, this is also and I use these machines of sync and resonance or similar prompts. And then the AI responds with images of non-existent machines, really, You'll see things like that briefly here, like this, for instance. So you say machines of sync and resonance and get this image. So I got lots of these images, and then I shared with the students, and I asked students to select one of these images, and their assignment was to kind of build this imaginary fictional machine. And not just to actually build it, but also invent a use or not use for it. Okay. So I guess this is a lot, I gained a lot of experience myself working in Aestihco, and this is kind of how I channeled it into my own practice, also as a way to demonstrate what I was talking before, that we are not interested, simply in something that is a complete module, but it's something that people can take and specialize to their particular needs. So these are my particular needs, how to teach people to work with electronics, and code, and this is how I took the elements from Aestihco and channeled it in the classroom. And it has at least 3 distinct elements. One is teamwork, they are asked to work together, and this is where also playing games in SATs is very important. We work with this in the classroom. The other is building things and also reusing materials, working with scrap stuff, dealing with electronics and actually building things. And then it's also the element of speculation. There is also this science fiction quality that it's not just a question of, okay, this is what you should build it. It's actually that you have to figure out what this thing is. And most of the students came back with certain scenario, that okay, this is a gate to another dimension, this is like I was always joking with the students, and as an example, I would say that, nobody laughed, of course, but I think it's still fun. My example was that, okay, this machine could be an edge smoothifier. So it's an object that, you put your eggs there, and it makes a smoothie out of human cell. And that's the egg simplified. But yeah, you don't laugh as well, so I think that our next project should be about having faith in a sense of humor.
I don't know if you're going to get finances for that. You might find it.
So yeah, but okay, kidding aside, what is important here, and this is something that I think that I learned in Aestihco, is that for a body of work, especially when it comes to education, for a body of work to be successful, you need also to provide the means to the students or the trainers to engage with it by connecting to their own interests and their own personal realities. Else it will die. And the games and the repertoire as well, they help a lot in that. In that you see, because as you grow old, sometimes also start with punishment for the new generations and so on. But with this kind of tools, we are always reminded, because you put like a few cards over there, you start a discussion and you see what are the kind of things that the students or the trainers of the students, they come up with, and they talk about this, and then you said, okay, this is what they actually can relate a lot with, and then we can take that to the classroom. One of the things that is only done here, because I don't have my colleagues at the moment and I can't talk more about it, is that we also did some work with the board games. My colleague Alexia has developed another game which is about, it's more specific on affairs of post-coloniality and how the local relates with affairs of digital colonialism, etc. So it's especially a game targeting Cyprus and what is like the secret reality within a world that is more and more colonized by. Anyhow, Alexa could have talked more about this. So, part of this work that is done at the moment is taking all the experience of Aestihco and channeling it to our research projects and classrooms. I think this is pretty much all from me. And we can talk later on in the panel in the afternoon.
Thank you very much. Also, for some how our work can actually be used in the classroom. So, hi again, let me formally introduce myself. So I'm Ramazan, I'm the coordinator of PR4, the student module. And well, the presentation for this part of the day is going to be a little bit more, organized, orthogonal, let's say. But what was really interesting when I prepared my presentation was looking back at how we wrote the project and what we wrote 4 years ago and what changed in these 4 years. And well, some of the things that you see on the slides were already addressed by my colleagues from the other PRs. So this is one of the main things that appeared in the project and in the student part of the project, that teaching aesthetics of care with ecology and technological education requires a radical transdisciplinary shift in teaching between arts, humanities, and sciences, in order to provide students with a transformative set of skills and competencies. All these, so they will be able to navigate all the obstacles of the 21st century. And I'm just going to go to the next slide. A lot more information in this part. But as I do this diagram,
I remember that we were writing this project, we were during the pandemic. We were forced during COVID to reinvent ourselves as teachers, to reinvent how we teach our students. That was one part, one aspect. We could see that the future will bring a lot of innovation in terms of technology.
But I don't think that any of us imagine how fast these technologies are evolving. Just think of all the generative tools that we have now. I mean, when was the first time you used one? And since the first one that you used, what can you do with it today? Or how many similar programs or tools exist? So I think that one of the most difficult things for us as teachers is to keep up with them and then teach our students how to use them properly, ethically, aesthetically, all the good words, teach them how to be good professionals in the future careers they will choose for themselves. So now going back to the PR4, the project results 4, as you can see in the lower part of the description here, we pretty much piggyback right all the other PRs because this was the application from all the other results. So we needed PR1 to map the aesthetics in technological education. We needed PR2 also to map circular economies of design. We needed PR3 to develop the teaching module. So what we did, we could not wait all these years until they finished. We infiltrated. So we worked on all other parts of the project. We were involved in everything just so we would know in real time and develop and adapt what we were supposed to do at the end of the project. As you will see in a few minutes, this part of the project had 6 tasks, but had 2 main goals. One was this student module that we were supposed to develop, again, based on everything that our colleagues found from the other PRs, in order to construct a toolkit that will allow the teachers to apply in a range of pedagogical and disciplinary settings. And the other one was the intensive student program that also was based on the intensive teacher program. So, as I said, 2 main goals, the ISP2 and then the toolkit. So the tasks that we had, task 0, was actually the presentation of our initial ideas, and this was done at the kickoff meeting, which was online on March 2022. It was more of a discussion, how we see this part of the project and where we think it could go. Everyone participated. Even though on the bottom I'm going to say who was in charge of, everyone participated in all tasks all the time. It's not like in other projects where you have work packages and somebody is in charge of the work package. The way this project was constructed, it had to have this interconnection between all parts of the project, otherwise it didn't work. So task 1 was the first draft of the student program. This was obviously developed mostly together with the coordinators of PR3. They were constructing the module for the teachers, so we had to work with them. But everyone, as I said, everyone was involved as well. So the first draft was presented at I think it was our first in-person meeting, the TBM in Darmstadt, in November 2022. And here are a few images and the draft on how it worked. Okay, task 2. Task 2, the second draft of the program, it didn't really have a specific time when it was delivered. It was more of an ongoing process between first draft and the program itself that we presented and put actually in action during the intensive study program. So here are the documents that actually helped us. One of them was already presented by PR1, the draft for the Aesthetics of Care module descriptor. We used that to construct our program and also to give information to the students. And then the program that was developed by PR3 for the Aesthetics of Care teachers training. Task 3 was the preparation and the implementation of the ISB2, which happened in May 2024 and was hosted by Cyprus University of Technology and MATLAB. You've seen from the presentation of Marinos a few minutes ago some of the images, and we have some of the students in the room, where together with 19 students from the partners, we tested those games, and I do have to say that the students were more serious than us, the professors, and had better ethics than we did during the games. I'm not speaking all the meetings. So here are a few informations, the call for the students, the program, and so on. Images from the 3 games that we played, that is with Signal, Revolt, and In the Loop with the participants. And this is actually these are the images that went online as well as dissemination of our activity. Task 4.4. Again, this was developed in the beginning for PR3. All partners were involved, but specifically we worked on this one with UTT and RTU in developing the questionnaire that was used in the teacher training program. We adapted that to the student program. As I said, we used whatever everybody constructed, we used it, and we've implemented. Here are a few of the types of surveys that we did and their results. And the last task, the final one, is the phase we are in. It's the final version of the transdisciplinary student program, which is now being finalized. It's in consultation with Waller and information in. So we still have 6 weeks to finish it until the end of the program to have the final form. So from what all my colleagues also said, we just need to refine some of the final documents of the program. Otherwise, all the activities that we've set to do were delivered. Even more, we have a lot of outcomes. So I'm just gonna use this moment also to tell you that after the lunch break, a few of the outcomes of this program will be presented in the room here behind the conference room. We tried to gather as many as we could. I'm sure that we did not get them all, but let's remember we had 3 international seminars, 1 international conference, 2 intensive study programs, 1 hackathon, 1 reparathon, this, workshops, a lot. And another thing that I wanted to say is this is not a singular or individual project. It's a series of projects. These are ideas or things that are in our mind all the time in our group in ECT Lab. This is part of the series. We started with Aestihco, so ethics and ecology, technological education. Now we move to Aestihco, aesthetics and ecology, technological education, and the third sister of the series is epistemology and ecology and technological education. And we are continuing this series. We are reinventing the projects, adapting them to what happened since we wrote the first iterations of this project. So thank you very much. I hope you had a good idea about what we did in the project for past years. And if you don't have questions, I think we can stop now. I don't know what time it is. It's now. We'll have, I think lunch starts only at 1.